We're being told to learn to live with the virus. And although many countries seem to be adjusting to the new lifestyles, there's growing concern, especially in Europe, of a second coronavirus wave as daily cases rise. In fact, restrictions eased are being reintroduced in some countries. Mamavi Owusu-Abuaji has been interacting with Thomas Sparrow, political correspondent with our partners, DW.
Well, in Germany, there's concern in particular about local outbreaks when it comes to coronavirus. There's one local outbreak, for example, in the southern part of the country, in Bavaria, at a farm. But Germany is also concerned about the risk that holidaymakers pose who have left the country for their summer holidays and are now returning. So one of the decisions that was mentioned by Germany's health minister was compulsory coronavirus testing for people who have come back from countries and regions deemed risky upon their arrival in Germany. When other tourists arrive from countries that are not necessarily deemed so risky, they could still carry out one of those tests, but it wouldn't be compulsory. That's one, for example, one measure that has been taken by the German government in the last few days. Something else that they have been discussing is what to do when there are regions, for example, that are particularly affected in a country that is not so particularly affected. So Germany, for example, understands that the numbers in Spain have been reduced if you compare them with a few weeks or a few months ago. Yet at the same time, there are regions within Spain that are at risk, where the numbers have increased. So that's why the German government also decided to advise against all non-essential travel to 3 regions in Spain that have been particularly affected by the coronavirus.
And Thomas, here in Ghana, borders are still closed. Is there still traveling in the European countries?
Borders are not closed within the European Union, so basically Germans and other Europeans can travel to different countries within the bloc, obviously as long as they maintain social distancing, as long as they wear the mask, as long as they respect social rules in the respective country or the respective region where they are. It becomes a bit more difficult when you look beyond the European Union because, as you well know, for countries like Brazil or the United States or Russia have been hit by the coronavirus in the last few weeks, or Latin America as well, and that means that there is an advice against travel to those regions. It also has to do with the fact that in those regions many airports are still closed and people are not allowed to travel freely. So all in all, I would say that Germans and Europeans can travel, and they have been asked to do so if possible, either locally, regionally, or if they're going to another country, to do so within the European Union. But again, obviously making sure that they follow the rules and that they look very carefully at the numbers in the respective place where they're traveling to.
And again, Thomas, Germany is one of the countries to have eased restrictions in the very early stages, but there are now fears of a second wave. Why is that?
So there are fears of a second wave. German health officials have insisted that Germany comparatively fared well when it came to dealing with the initial outbreak of the coronavirus. If you remember, we spoke about it on various occasions, how Germany compared to other European countries like France or like Spain or like Italy. Yet at the same time, officials are now concerned about the possibility of a second wave. Some officials, some politicians, for example, a regional politician here in Germany mentioned that the second wave is actually already here. But health officials from Germany's Public Health Institute have been more cautious when talking about this possible second wave. However, they have stressed that there are signs of concern, that Germans have to be conscious, for example, of those local outbreaks that I mentioned, the fact that there has been an increase in, for example, the numbers of infected people after family gatherings or at the workplace. So those are issues that are of concern, as well as what I mentioned earlier, the fact that many people are returning from their holidays abroad.
And Thomas, are there predictions of how this second wave would look like, and is that affecting behavioral? Let me ask the question again. Are there predictions? So Thomas, are there predictions of how the second wave will look like, and is that affecting behaviors?
Well, there is, as a start, no consensus on whether we're already in the second wave or we aren't. As I said, there are some politicians, some media outlets that are talking already of a second wave here in Europe, but at the same time, other officials, in particular health officials, have been cautious and have said that they still don't know whether this is indeed a second wave or whether this is something different. So when we talk about predictions, we have to be very careful. However, when you look at how Germans and other Europeans have reacted, there are important elements to consider. German officials have said that one of the reasons why the number numbers have increased here in this country is because Germans have become complacent, or in fact, some even said negligent when it comes to respecting those social distancing rules or the use of face masks. And that's why health officials have been very, very strict when it comes to telling Germans, telling people to maintain those social distancing rules and to be clear that the pandemic is not over, even when you consider that Germany comparatively has done better than other European countries.
Just finally on this, is there stricter punishment for those who flout the protocols?
That's interesting because for a long time, for example, here in Berlin, people were asked to wear face masks on public transport, for example, but there was no specific punishment. That, however, changed a few weeks ago, and now there is a fine if you are found on the public transport system without a mask when you should be wearing a mask. So this gives you an idea of how officials dealt with this at the beginning, how they're dealing with it now, and how people, for example, on public transport are also considering these issues. Germany and German authorities didn't actually want to have to fine people for this. They were actually hoping that people would do this on their own will, because they believe that it's important, because they understand the risks. But it has also come to the point where in certain cases they have found it important to impose certain fines to make sure that people do follow the rules.